amazing interview about retiring to Mexico this week. It lasted well over an hour, but it was so packed with amazing information we decided to cut it into two to make it easier to watch the segments. This is part one and what it covers. Enjoy.
Hi friends, welcome back to Laptop Seniors. So pleased to have you back with us, and you will love the show today. As you know, we just returned from Mexico City, and because we are always looking to give you the most factual and current information, we could not wait to share with you this interview that we have set up for today with Mariana of Mexico Relocation Guide. We've already posted several videos on our insights into what we saw in the neighborhoods of Mexico City, but there's so much more to Mexico, and Mariana has insights of all of Mexico, information which you will learn in this video.
There's a lot of usual questions that almost always come up, typically when somebody wants to retire somewhere. You know, the usual questions: what's the weather? Is it safe? Where is it safe? What's it cost? What's the cost of living? And what's an average person work there? So what do I need in order to have a pretty decent middle class life, or just eke out a living and just get by? And then the big one, which we're going to go through a lot because Mariana really knows it, is what's involved with the visas and what's that minimum amount of money that you need, because Mexico is considerably higher now than it used to be, and it's definitely higher than some of the countries that we've talked about, like Uruguay and Argentina, and certainly Panama. It's like, I don't know, 4 times as much as Panama at this point.
Okay, so if I may introduce you, Mariana was born and raised in Mexico City up to the age of 7, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, beautiful. Then your family moved to the U.S. and you grew up from 7 in the U.S. And as fate would have it, you met and married Dustin Lang. All of our Panama people out there, does the name Lang sound familiar? Think Jackie Lang of Panama Relocation Tours. Dustin is Jackie's son, so this is an extension of the family business.
Thank you, Vivi. That was a really nice introduction to myself and Mexico Relocation Guide and my amazing mother-in-law, Jackie Lang, who runs Panama Relocation Tours.
Wonderful. And I understand your background working is in marketing and sales, which totally lends itself to producing this wonderful guide that's very usable.
Yeah, we've used your mother-in-law's. We've used Jackie's guide. We didn't actually go on any of the tours, but I got the guide, I don't know, 4 years ago, and it's been wonderful because there's so much stuff in it that helps, and I'm sure your guide is pretty much identical, covering all the bases, which is cool. So let's get into it. So let's start with some easy things, like where in Mexico do most of the expats who are retiring, where do they typically go?
Top 5 cities, I would say, where most retirees, specifically retirees, right? Because there's people who are either near retirement or at retirement already, are usually moving to Puerto Vallarta, Cabo San Lucas, Ajijic is a big one.
Yeah.
Playa del Carmen, that whole area in the Riviera Maya.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Well, you say those names much more eloquently than we do.
To go along with that, what do you in your judgment, what are the safe cities? When you look on YouTube or you look on the net, everybody has a different list. I'm just curious what yours is.
It would probably be easier to warn people on which cities I consider unsafe.
Great idea, sure.
Acapulco?
Acapulco is one of those areas where as long as you stay within the resort areas, it's perfectly safe. I wouldn't necessarily call it like the most unsafe city, although generally like that area does have a lot of cartel presence. Mm-hmm. But I would say parts of, like Irapuato, Michoacán, Zacatecas, Celaya in Guanajuato, Colima for sure. I would avoid it at all costs. Tijuana, a lot of the border towns tend to have a lot of cartel presence. So, and most people don't want to live on the border towns. Like, they're not pretty.
No.
So they're, most people are not attracted to them to begin with.
Next would be like healthcare. I know from our friends who lived in Ahik for 6 years, they loved healthcare and said it was great, and they liked it actually better than their Canadian healthcare, where they came from. How does healthcare roughly work in Mexico? Once you have a visa, do you get like automatic insurance, or do you have to buy insurance, or generally how's that work?
It's a pretty complicated topic because it's not very straightforward. There are 3 branches of healthcare in Mexico that people could, opt into one of the 3. Mm-hmm. One of them is called Insabi. Right. INSABI. It's an acronym for a very much long word, right? Mm-hmm. Or a couple of long words.
Sure.
But essentially, that is entirely subsidized by the government. And it's meant for the most impoverished people of Mexico who don't have access to higher incomes and are not employed by traditional employers, and therefore don't have benefits like healthcare in their contract. It's kind of like the informal workers, right? The gardeners, the house cleaners, the people that are working construction, those kinds of things. So Insabi is meant for those people who don't have access to a formal contract with an employee or an employer. Then there's IMSS, which is entirely funded or mostly funded by people's taxes.
Oh.
And then you, as an employee who pay taxes because you're employed or maybe you're self-employed, are getting, it's kind of like Social Security, right?
You're like Medicare or something like that, sort of? Yeah.
Yeah, you're getting a deduction, and then you get access to some of these hospitals, which are IMSS, which again is also an acronym for a lot of words put together.
Right. That's okay.
For a lot of foreigners, I try to not encourage them. I'm looking for the word. I mostly tell them, Insabi's not really for you. It's meant for people who really don't have the funds to be able to get healthcare. Okay. It's very basic coverage. There's long wait times because, it's meant for the general population who don't have a lot of money. There's also waiting periods for most ailments. So you really don't get coverage until the 3rd year, like full coverage until the 3rd year.
Wow.
Which a lot of people don't know, or a lot of people aren't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They just think Mexico has free healthcare, right? And they don't know this, the devil's in the details, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And for IMSS, as a foreigner, you do have to have a residency visa for either one of these. So you have to have a legal permit to live in Mexico. You can't be a tourist. But for IMSS, you can choose to sign up for it without having ever been an employee of a company and paying taxes into Mexico. Okay. But then your premiums are based on your age, assuming you don't have pre-existing conditions, and assuming that you're super healthy and you can qualify for it. It's a really good option. The only caveat is that the IMSS hospitals across Mexico, they vary a lot depending on which city. So, some are really good, some might be very, very, very basic and don't have medications, don't have equipment, might not have the best doctors. There's variances.
So the plan that you get will limit you to specific hospitals and healthcare?
Correct. IMSS specifically, you sign up for it based on your municipality. So essentially based on your zip code, and based on your age and based on your health.
Wow.
And you are limited to those hospitals within that municipality, unless there was a life-threatening emergency. So there is one additional healthcare option which I personally recommend, and that is private healthcare. And that is, going through a traditional insurance company who will assess basically your lifestyle, which level of hospitals you should get coverage at. So we could do a whole live stream just on healthcare. It's a very complicated process.
Right, I understand. And are you referring to a Mexican private insurance plan or international?
Yeah.
So there's a variety of Mexican companies that can insure foreigners, and then there's also a variety of international companies that personally, the clients that we help have used both, and there's mixed reviews on both, right? I mean, it just depends on, again, what hospitals you're going to, what level of coverage you have, those kinds of things.
One last thing on insurance, just a question, because it definitely comes up for retirees. Obviously, people going digital nomads and that sort of stuff, it has no bearing. Do most of the insurance companies insure 70 and over, or most of them's like, we're not doing that?
Great
That's a great question. If you were insured before 69, most likely you will get
They'll keep
grandfathered in after 70. But if you are a brand new applicant, it's not impossible to find an insurance company that will insure you. It most likely will have to be an international plan. And the premiums do tend to go up because, you are higher risk. I'm not an insurance broker by any means.
Right. No, you're giving great general information, though.
Yeah.
And can you give us any ballpark on what the cost would be for private insurance?
I have personally seen people in, like, let's say a person who's 65, relatively healthy, with a Mexican insurance company get a monthly premium of about $200, right? For 200, 300 in that ballpark. But again, it really just depends on the company, the plan, what level of hospitals you're going to have access to. I know Panama's a little bit different, so.
Do you find that the people that you work with tend to keep their American healthcare? Do they tend to keep Medicare going and then add on top of that?
Yeah, so for U.S. citizens specifically, or residents who are eligible for Medicare, we do really recommend that they sign up for Medicare as soon as they're eligible and add an Advantage plan. Because a lot of Advantage plans, not all of them, but a lot of them do cover you in Mexico for life-threatening emergencies. So if you had a life-threatening emergency, you could get coverage in Mexico with the right Advantage plan. But in order for you to have an Advantage plan, you have to sign up for Medicare.
Sure.
So yeah, we do recommend people sign up for it. Not everybody does, because some people just, prefer to take on that risk. They know they're never going to go back to the U.S.
Okay, let's move on to the one that is the big one, because if you want to go retire somewhere, you want to live there and you want to live there legally, and that becomes the visas. And there's the temporary visa in Mexico and the permanente. I know that because of our friends in IE. I've heard that word a million times. And the permanente, at least theirs is, I would assume everybody else's is still there for life. Once you get them, they go forever. Would that be correct? Yeah, which is an amazing benefit to have. I mean, it really is, if you want to maybe leave and then come back again or something.
And what I understand from your website is that anybody can stay in Mexico for up to 6 months. Is that correct? Without having one of those visas?
Anybody from a list of approved countries. So not everybody in the world. Everyone from the United States, Canada, Japan, anyone in the Schengen area, parts of Latin America, for example, Panama, other parts of Europe not in the Schengen area. So yeah, a lot of countries, I'm sure, that watch your channel and mine can stay in Mexico on a tourist permit. It's automatic when you come through customs, and it's up to 180 days. So it's not a guaranteed 180 days. It is up to the immigration officer, and they can give you 7 days, 30 days, or any time frame that really, it's up to their discretion.
There's a lot of things that are discretionary, aren't there?
Very much so. Yeah. Unless there are, like, a lot of airports are rolling out these automated kiosks. Where you come in, like, for example, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico City, Cancun are 3 major airports that have these kiosks, and you walk through them as a tourist, and what I'm hearing from pretty much everyone who has used them is that they automatically give you 180 days.
Okay, yeah, so those might be the preferred places to enter Mexico.
When you're looking for the 180 days, yes, there are some cases where people want to have a short-term tourist permit.
Oh.
So, and I can talk about that too.
Yes,
very important for the residency visa.
Okay, yeah, well, we'll go through that when we get into the residency visa. We'll do that right now. So, typically for most visas, that you're going to retire for Panama, for Uruguay. We did the visas temporaries, because we lived in Uruguay for a while, and they all basically are the same documents. They want a marriage certificate, birth certificate, a police record, and then your amount of money. So they're sort of a given. So let's assume that somebody has went ahead and they've gotten all their papers, and they have gone, now they're going to a consulate or an embassy in their home country, and they have all the papers that they need. And anybody can find that list online. It's a pretty easy list. So they walk into the consulate, and what typically would then happen at that point, because they're going to be looking for financial, you need to be financially solvent to be able to cover yourself when you're in Mexico.
Right. So does it make sense to start with the temporary or the permanent?
Most people are given temporary residency, even if they meet the requirements for permanent residency, which tend to be higher economic solvency requirements, because it's really up to the consulate on what residency visa they give you. And a lot of consulates are very selective about giving people permanent residency from the very beginning. For starters, not only are the economic solvency requirements higher for a permanent residency, but generally people have to also be retired and be over 60 years of age. Some consulates require you to be over 62, some consulates require you to be over 65. So there's a lot of ambiguity across the different consulates, which is why the online guide is huge, because we cover a lot of those little nuances.
So do I understand correctly, sorry to interrupt, that it's not that you apply for temporary or permanent, you just apply for a visa and they give you what they think you deserve?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, we do give people advice that if you want to get permanent, you should check off, there's 2 boxes on the application, you should check off permanent. And, worst case scenario, if they decide that you do not get permanent, they'll give you temporary, if you have qualified for permanent anyway. For temporary residency, the requirements change every year because it's based on a formula that uses Mexico City's minimum wage, and Mexico City's minimum wage tends to increase every year. So for example, in 2024, the economic solvency requirements for a temporary residency visa, again, it ranges depending on the consulate. So, but on average, they required more than $4,000 a month for either through employment or a pension or some form of income, right? Or
and that's
if you
for an
didn't have that
individual,
regular
right?
income, you have to prove at least $70,000 in savings or an investment account or brokerage account or 401k in order to qualify. For couples, it also varies on the consulate. A lot of consulates require that each person be independently economically solvent.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
But if that's the case and that's the consulate you're going to, it's not a problem because Mexico is very family friendly. So as long as one of you qualifies and you are approved, you can petition your spouse and other dependents from within Mexico without having to prove economic solvency. So it's really not an issue. I know that scares people, but it's really not a problem. As long as you are legally married or you have children under the age of 18 who are not married, you can also petition parents. You can also petition siblings. You can also petition children that are over 18 with certain exclusions, like you have to prove that they are still your dependent. The residency visa process for the main applicant is usually broken up into 2 parts. If you're going through economic solvency, it's broken up into 2 parts. There's many ways to get residency, so I'm going to focus on economic solvency.
Okay.
But for most people, the process starts at a Mexican consulate or embassy near them, just assuming that maybe some people that are watching might be in Europe and they don't have a consulate, but rather a Mexican embassy near them. Mm-hmm. So you would start by making an appointment, proving your economic solvency. That's through financial documents. If you're applying through income, that's usually your most current 6 months of financial documents. If you're applying based on savings or investments, you need up to 12 months of your most recent 12 months of financial documents. And then once you're approved there, you're given what's called a like pre-approval stamp on your passport. From that point forward, you have 180 days to travel to Mexico and do what is called canje. So it's just an exchange of that passport stamp to an actual residency card. And then once you get that residency card, which for most cities across Mexico for a canje, it's usually done the same day. But it can take a couple of days and even up to a couple of weeks if there is any discrepancies on your application. But for most people, it usually is the same day. Once you have your residency card, the very following day, you can petition dependents. So keep in mind, this is for 2024. For 2025, those are going to change. And we're not really sure yet exactly what the requirements are going to be for 2025 because the consulates, it's just very complicated. So the consulates don't always use a formula. They don't always use the same exchange rates that are public or like available at the beginning of the year. And sometimes even throughout the year, they change their income requirements based on the exchange rate. For 2024, they're anywhere between, $4,000 to $4,300 US a month for the last 6 months. So you needed to prove that you had this minimum requirement so that you made $4,300 every month for the last 6 months. For investments, brokerage accounts, 401ks, those kind of things, you had to prove that you had at least 70,000. Some consulates required 75,000. Some required 80,000. So it really is all over the board. For 2025, the expectation is that it'll go up 12%.
Wow.
But again, we don't know yet because the consulates haven't made this information public to us and they haven't verified this information and they won't verify that information until 2025. So we will know in 2025 what the actual requirements are by consulate because they vary so much between consulates. The one in Austin, Texas, for example, will have one requirement. The one in Dallas, Texas will have a different requirement. The one in Denver will have one requirement. The one in Orlando, Florida will have a different requirement. So they vary a lot.
Well, that's really interesting. And what that says to me is all of you out there who are still working and thinking that Mexico is the place for you to retire, would you recommend that people apply while they're still working and showing that they have that income stream?
You should apply as soon as possible, especially if you are already on the cusp of not qualifying, because for starters, the requirements can change at any given time, right?
If that 12% actually happens in a matter of a month, into 2025, then...
Yeah, that's like 4,800 all of a sudden.
That could make a big difference.
Yeah. Which isn't like a huge increase, but if you're making $4,200, then it might be the differentiator, right?
So let's say somebody's somewhere around the average Social Security payment, like maybe $2,500, per month, but they also have like 50 grand that they can prove both things. Do they allow stuff to be put together? No.
Oh, wow.
It's one or the other.
One or the other. Great. Okay. Wow. Good to know.
And then as far as you saying that people should apply as soon as possible, if they're still living and working in the U.S., do they have a requirement if they're approved for a residency visa? Do they have to show a certain amount of time in Mexico right away, within a year, 2 years?
That's a great question. Okay, let me just say this to everyone who is watching. Mexico is a land of consistent inconsistency. Like, you have to get comfortable with one consulate doing one thing, and then you show up to Mexico and that immigration office doing a completely different thing than the consulate told you, which is why, I'll get to it, I promise, Vivi, but which is why I think not only is our guide very, very valuable, but so are the contacts in the guide. We give them a directory of immigration experts that know these ins and outs and can help you prepare depending on which consulate you're going to, depending on which office in Mexico you're going to finish the process in, depending on which dependents you're going to petition, depending on which bank accounts you have, because there's a lot of moving parts and it can get really confusing. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I still learn new things every day, right? So it's a complicated process. It's not as easy as other countries.
And will you or those contacts actually recommend certain embassies or consulates where the requirements are a bit lower?
Yeah, certain facilitators, we call them facilitators because you don't necessarily have to be a lawyer in immigration in Mexico to help people in immigration.
Great.
But yeah, some facilitators do have some favorite consulates or embassies that they refer their clients to because they know that the employees at those consulates are very flexible. Another thing to keep in mind is that, every couple of years there's a change in the consulate for the consul. So the consul doesn't have like a permanent position there. Every couple of years they change them out. So that means all new employees, all new ways of all new gray areas, all new nuances and things like that then we have to learn and then communicate to our clients.
Yeah, wow.
So again, your guide online is constantly being updated. So somebody subscribing is always going to get the most current information. Beautiful.
Constantly being updated.
Yeah.
And to get back to why I recommend people applying sooner than later, especially if you are still working, is because I know, especially people who might watch your channel are thinking about retirement, or maybe they are nearing retirement if they're not already retired. And I do think that for those who are going to go into retirement, they might not have this guaranteed income. Even if they have, investments and things like that, they might not know. It can fluctuate, right? Whereas if they have employment right now and they can prove that they make this minimum amount and they can qualify, it's better to apply while you can show to the consulate that you have this current stream of income coming in, right? I would say though, if you are planning to retire in Mexico in some future and you don't plan to work anymore, I would not volunteer that information to the consulate because it would raise some flags as to, will you be economically solvent in the future?
Right.
It's fine if you are right now, but in the future you might not be.
It's interesting the way, for many of the things that you're saying, my mind is comparing them to Panama, as we went through that whole process, but also for people who might be comparing the whole process. Mexico certainly has a higher threshold of finance, but yet at the same time, like in Panama, you had to have pension, pretty much. You couldn't do it with work stuff.
It had to be a lifetime guaranteed income.
Yeah, in many ways, okay, the threshold's higher, but actually, in some instances, it could be actually, well, maybe not easier because Panama's so low, but
it just opens up the door to some people who might not qualify in Panama.
Yeah, not as daunting as it would immediately, appear. Prior to you explaining this, I was thinking okay, $4,000 or $5,000, and then per month, and then the permanente is even more. It's wow, that's a big chunk, especially if you're coming from Canada because you got to do the exchange. For a permanente, you're well over $100,000 coming in each year. You go,
there is a proposal in the works that got proposed in 2024 as to how economic solvency is calculated. And economic solvency currently, 2024 and beyond, was calculated used Mexico City's minimum wage, which again, in 2018, it was 80 some pesos a day for minimum wage. I mean, it's gone up 200%. But there is a proposal in the works in 2024 that hopefully will go into effect in 2025, where instead of using Mexico's minimum wage, the consulates should use another measure called UMAS, UMA, which is Unidad de Medida de Actualización. And it's just another acronym for a long set of words. But essentially, the UMAS are much lower than Mexico City's minimum wage. And if it goes through, which it's already in the judicial courts and everything, if it goes through, then that would significantly lower people's economic solvency requirements for either temporary or permanent residency.
So is that more based on cost of living, the UMAS, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
UMAS is entirely based on cost of living.
Tell me if this is right or wrong at this point from your knowledge. Probably about 2 years ago, I saw a young YouTuber, and my guess is she was from LA, and she was Mexican or certainly Latino because her Spanish was awesome. And she was going through people, in different Mexico cities, and she was asking them all the same question. And the question was, if you could have sort of a really great job that you would be super happy with, that you would have and would pay you well, and so on and so forth, what would that job probably end up being, and what would it pay you per year? And then she would, they would say, pay some pesos amount, and she would flip it into American money. And at the time, you're smiling. I was wondering if it was you that I was watching doing this. Anyway, the amount came out to roughly around $15,000, and that would be
U.S.
Yeah, U.S. And that would typically be working as a managerial job in some way at a multinational. Does that sound about right?
For an individual, right? Like not a family of
Yeah,
four.
no, just a person.
I think that's very reasonable. It all depends on where in Mexico you live. Our rule of thumb is if you can qualify for residency, you're going to live very comfortably in Mexico.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you have the funds to prove that you make $4,000, $4,400, whatever the 2025 requirements end up being, maybe they drop to, $2,000 a month, which would still be a very good income in Mexico for a single person. I have done a lot of surveys of our customers because it's very different to ask a Mexican, how much they can live on versus to ask a foreigner. The reality is a lot of foreigners do a really good job of adapting to a very Mexican way of life. But a lot of newcomers, especially the first 1 or 2 years, you're still coming with a very different mindset, right, from your home country. So you're probably not going to rent the $300 a month house that's very basic, maybe in the outskirts, unless that's like entirely the only budget that you have. You're probably going to rent more closer to like the $800, $900 a month rental, $600, $500 a month rental, but it all depends on where you live. So again, a really good rule of thumb is if you can qualify for residency, you're going to live very comfortably in Mexico. But there are other ways to qualify for residency because it's not only economic solvency. There is actually a program right now that allows people who have visited Mexico before 2023 to be able to get temporary residency without having to prove economic solvency. So there is a loophole available for a lot of people. Now, the caveat is that you had to have visited Mexico before 2023 and to be able to prove that you have visited Mexico before.
Yeah, that would be us.
Right. And how would you recommend they go about that?
We have a guide that I highlight what the requirements are because you needed to have a visit before 2023. You need to come to Mexico, right? If you're not already in Mexico, you need to travel to Mexico as a tourist. And this is where I wanted to mention that some people want a short-term FMM or a tourist permit. Not everybody wants 180 days because you have to wait for that tourist permit to expire before you can apply. So some people don't want to wait in Mexico 6 months or 3 months or whatever immigration gives them. Some people just want to wait a week.
And could you just request a week when you're? No.
A lot of immigration agents are they're very smart and they're onto that and they know that people are trying to game the system, which is not really gaming the system because the government allows it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't want to give people just 7 days or 4 days or whatever just because somebody requests it. We recommend that if somebody wants to have a higher chance. There's no guarantees, but if they want to have a higher chance of getting a short-term tourist permit, that they use a land border because land borders work a little bit differently. And if you tell a land border agent that you're coming to Mexico for 3 days or 4 days, they usually give you a 7-day FMM, which is that tourist permit. And then you could travel to, once you cross the border, you could go to the nearest airport and then fly to a different city if you want to do the process somewhere else. Or some people just end up processing in the border.
Right.
So much great information on retiring in Mexico. Don't miss part 2. That's coming up in just a couple days. So if you want to be part of that future of Mexico and maybe retire there and enjoy it, I suggest that you contact Mariana Lang, and you can certainly do that by just going to mexicorelocationguide.com. Everything that we've ever talked about is sitting on there.
And we'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, and Mariana is graciously going to give you 10% if you do what's on the screen right now, Laptop Seniors. That's going to be the code for 10% off. Certainly, we found the Panama Relocation Guide infinitely helpful for our journey through Panama. So thank you for being with us. This was great.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both for allowing me to share this space with your audience. And obviously, I'm honored that you even thought of me to share the moving to Mexico insights. I know it's a lot of information, but I guarantee you that we really do try to make it a lot easier on people so that they don't feel so overwhelmed. Because moving to another country is already overwhelming in itself. So we try to make the bureaucratic process seem a lot easier.
Thank you so much. And
You want to close that baby out?
yes, I will. We sure appreciate all of you watching our videos and coming back time after time. Thank you, and please come back and see us again soon. Bye for now.